Okay, now that you've heard from the ministers for fun times, it's time to get back to the state of the finances. And can I thank my colleagues for leaving me three or 4 minutes for my contribution this afternoon. What I propose to do is just very quickly go through a little bit of an update on where we're here in a much smaller audience today than we were at budget breakfast, of course, but I just want to make a few comments to this much smaller audience that the Premier has already acknowledged. The Premier stated earlier on a very, very important update with our economic figures, and that is state final demand. I want to make some comments around that. Today, the National Accounts highlighted the fact that for the first time since 2013, our state final demand, our domestic economy, has grown for 2 consecutive quarters. This is extraordinarily positive data, driven by some recent data around private sector capital spending, also first time increasing in the September quarter for the last 3 years. So we're starting to see a turnaround in our domestic economy that has really been the reason why we've seen such dramatic declines around business investment. And those declines around business investment over the last 3 or 4 years have driven our state final demand figures. If indeed we do see more continuation of those private sector capital investment, then certainly you'll start seeing a more continuation of a growing state domestic economy. Of course, whilst last year we had a contracting GSP figures, really that was driven by the fact that final year, 16-17 business investment, really came off again a little bit higher than we expected, around about 7.5%. But we are now expecting that to increase, certainly in the last 2 years of the forward estimates. But hopefully, it might even be a bit earlier than that. That is the reason why we're now starting to see that SFD figure for the first time, as I said, since 2013 turn around. To give you an idea of what happened over the last decade, the total value of private sector capital increased by about 160% in 10 years. It has been a phenomenal period in WA. So when the business investment contracts back to the more normal state that we're getting to now, that has obviously had some pains going through the economy. But now all our leading indicators are starting to look very, very good. Very good. Back to the more normal levels that we expect in Western Australia once you take account of that period of extraordinary capital spend over the last decade. Employment, our leading employment indicators are now starting to turn in a more positive way. The online job vacancies for October 2017 up 17, nearly 18% compared to October 2016. Our employment now in October 2017 up around 38,000 Western Australians compared to October 2016, and importantly nearly every single one of those is in the space of full-time employment. So the uptake has really been in that full-time space, which is why you are seeing also a big increase across the last couple of years in our participation rates. These are very, very important lead indicators which also reflect some of the data you're seeing around consumer confidence, whether it be the CCI, the NAB, a range of different surveys now highlighting the fact that there is confidence returning. Generally, households are still cautious with the way they're spending money. You're still seeing increases really in those non-discretionary spaces. But if you start seeing more confidence in that employment data, people do feel as though their jobs are more secure, their hours are going to increase, then certainly the retail figures will start to increase as well, not just simply the non-discretionary spend. So we are now, I think, entering a very exciting time in WA. Of course, in respect of how that translates into revenue to Western Australia, all our levers, all state governments' levers in respect of the finances tend to be limited and lag. So revenue flows later, but ultimately if we're getting higher than expected economic growth, higher than expected employment data, and you'll see in the mid-year review in a couple of weeks, we're upgrading our employment expectations in a positive way, then I'll take that if that's then going to lead to higher revenue in the out years of the forward estimates. And that's really what we're striving to achieve as a government, more employment confidence, therefore more general confidence in our economy. Therefore, everybody in this room and the organisations you represent feel the confidence not just to employ, but to spend and continue to invest in your businesses. Moving on to a couple of points I want to make around energy. Energy is a particularly problematic place, and I think if there is a classic example of policy failure and the implications of policy failure over an extended period of time, look no further than the national energy market on the east coast of this country. Hopefully now with the National Energy Guarantee, regardless of what your views of that particular mechanism may be. But we do need our East Coast friends to land a consistent and endurable policy position, because ultimately, whilst in respect of supply capacity, our reserve capacity mechanism, whilst a bit old and creaking now, we'll update that, has delivered the capacity that we've needed each year. I go to meetings with energy ministers on the East Coast, and they are genuinely worried about the provision of energy during their summer months, genuinely worried that it will fail. This is the result of policy failure, and it's very, very important that those state ministers with the federal government land an enduring policy in that regard. But we're seeing here in Western Australia, we have been very fortunate, not part of the NEM. We have an excess supply of gas. That's not great for many people, including one of my organisations, Synergy, that's losing a bit of money around gas. But certainly, as you're seeing with the retail end, some very positive outcomes in respect of the competition and demand and pursuit of customers from a range of different gas retailers. But you're also now, we've committed to in Western Australia, and the Premier referred to the NWIS, the North West Interconnected System. Getting an independent operator over that will be very important for confidence, because ultimately the excess capacity of the NWIS is driven by a lack of confidence in the operator of the NWIS. You've seen our renewable fund, Synergy Renewable Fund, to help us deliver on our LRET obligations. And importantly, in respect of Western Power, like many networks around the world over the next 10 years, I get 2 minutes. The Premier gets 5, but I get 2. Over the next 10 years, the Western Power does have to invest in a significant part of their grid, and a lot of that grid is on the edge of the large Swiss. And people will be surprised to know that about 52% of Western Power's your heavy, your high voltage distribution network service 3% of its customer base. And that cost is smeared over all our bills, regardless of where you live. And now, that's not a critique, but that historically has been how we've delivered energy to people on the edge of grid, people in regional areas of Western Australia. Now with standalone power systems, now with the development of solar, wind, battery technology, we can do that in a much better way, a much more cost-effective way. And a great example has been the trial undertaken by Western Power and the Great Southern that saw not only is it a more cost-effective way to provide energy, but the amount of blackouts in that trial reduced from about 70 hours per year to 5. So the actual provision and the reliability of the supply being provided through standalone power systems, through microgrids, not only is an efficient way for Western Power to invest in its asset base, but importantly, it ensures that customers get a much more reliable service at a much more effective costs, and ultimately that high cost isn't then smeared over everybody else's bill. So I guess the message I'll leave you all, and the message I think that most of my ministerial colleagues and the Premier have said already, is that we are now entering, I think, an exciting phase in Western Australia. We're returning to more normal levels of growth in our economy, driven by that business investment. And if that comes on earlier and more strong than we expect, then that will drive even better employment figures that you'll see, as I've said, to be updated in the mid-year review in a couple of weeks. But it is, despite the fact that the finances are probably in the big trough at the moment, last year and this year, the tough years, probably an operating deficit around about the $3 billion mark for 2016-17-18 to build on a not insignificant deficit last financial year. But you'll see across the forward estimates a steady and not unreliable reduction of those deficit positions to an operating surplus by 2020-21. That's what we're determined to deliver, because ultimately, once you get back to that position of an operating surplus and maintain that across a period of years, you'll see net debt reduce quite dramatically. But thank you, everybody. I look forward to your questions, and Merry Christmas.